10,000 steps a day, 250 protein, 415 grams of carb, and 50 grams of fat. That's the plan for week 2. So first up, lat pull downs. It's quite a tough movement to get your lat fully short, so that's why it's placed earlier on in the session. The whole goal here is taking that lat through its full stretch, so fully protracting up, then fully retracting back, retracting that scapula, and then driving those elbows down sort of into the pockets underneath your armpits. So just nice and slow contraction, taking that lat through a full movement, so fully lengthened, fully shortened, and just trying to move that scapula throughout. So like I said, that's placed earlier on, just ran 2 sets of 12 to 15 on that. So second up is an upper back row. This pull session is pretty much 0 lower back loading, apart from sort of a couple row movements, but nothing like majorly lower back taxing like a deadlift, hip hinge, rack pull, anything along those lines. Obviously I can't run those movements at the minute with my knee, so that's why having this bench here to really brace into the movement is a really good idea. So the whole goal here is leaning over, and instead of driving those elbows back to the hip and potentially sort of prioritizing lats a little bit, the whole goal here is to drive those elbows out a little bit and back to really hit that upper back. So with a normal rowing movement for your lats, you'll generally sort of drive that elbow back so it's in line with your scapula. The whole goal here is to hit that upper back a little bit more. So really thinking about flaring those elbows out a little bit more and driving them back as far as possible, and really hitting that upper back, getting to those traps, getting to those rear delts a little bit, as that's an area that I need a lot more sort of thickness. Moving on to single arm dumbbell rows. So leaning over here, and you can see through that movement that it's not just directly driving back, it's sort of in that semicircular arc. So stretching forwards again, letting that lat fully protract out, and then the elbow sort of driving down and under back into the hip. So elbow to hip on this one. So we've done a vertical pull, a horizontal row, and driving back into that upper back. Then we've got another horizontal row here, but that elbow is driving down and back into the hip. So we've hit that upper back, and now we're sort of getting into that sort of mid and lower back, predominantly sort of targeting the lats here on this row. So chest supported row, the barbell, that was just 1 set 6 to 8, so a top set and then 1 back off set 10 to 12. These dumbbell rows, the same setup, 1 top set 6 to 8, back off set 10 to 12. So taking that to mechanical failure, to the point where I'm not able to do another rep whilst keeping my form perfect. There's no point doing extra reps when your form's dropped. It's not really going to place a huge amount of emphasis on that muscle. It's just going to generate unnecessary amounts of fatigue that you potentially can't recover from. And thirdly, it'll just open yourself up to the potential for injury. And especially when, obviously you never want to get injured, but especially when you're sort of dieting, you have less body weight, you're potentially going to injure yourself more. And second to that, obviously when you've got a deadline, you don't want to injure yourself and then obviously throw that deadline off. So then next movement, lat pullover. So cable pullover, the goal here is, by this point we've done all that heavy contraction work. We've done pull down, we've done a horizontal row, upper back emphasis, and sort of into those lat emphasis, elbow high, elbow low. And then here, the goal is just to drive as much blood into the lats. So we've done heavy work, we've done that movement where we're looking at loading that lat with a lot of mechanical tension. Here, we're just looking at driving blood into that muscle. There's a lot to be said for sort of the more blood you can drive into a muscle, the better pump you get, the more potential for nutrient delivery into that muscle. With more nutrient delivery, you can potentially have the potential for more growth. So here, taking it through a 3-point mechanical drop set. So here, starting where I'm weakest. So when I've got less fatigue, I want to be working in a movement where I'm weakest. And as I get stronger, and then as I get more fatigued, I make the movement easier. So nice and upright here, thinking about pulling over and squeezing that lat nice and hard, holding that contraction, but just driving blood into it. And you'll notice that as I fatigue, that's when I then a little bit more explosive with the contractions and just looking at driving that elbow back. And then from there, as I've reached failure in there, I'm just leaning over a little bit more. And from here, yes, still a pull over movement, but I'm sort of looking at pulling down and under, sort of a little bit in between a pullover and a pull down. Again, just looking at driving more blood into that muscle. So three-point mechanical drop set here, aiming for 30 reps collectively. So I think I got something like, obviously I've got it logged, but it was about sort of like 10, and then 12 and then 8. So I hit 30 there. And then the following week I added 2.5 kilos aside, so I added 5 kilos and matched reps, which is quite cool. So then I dropped down even more and just think about driving back and down. Again, reaching that mechanical failure, and then I'm a little bit more explosive with that, just looking at pulling that elbow back and down and driving blood in there. So I'm contracting. Once I've hit that point where I'm struggling to contract and move it, I'm a little bit more explosive and just drive more blood into it and just really focus on that tension in that lat. So that's lat pull down. So that 3-point mechanical drop set, aiming for 30 reps collectively. So next up is another upper back focus, but this one placing a lot of emphasis on those rear delts. So hand grip, I went a little bit wider than with the barbell, and I'm looking at pulling those elbows back. And again, because it's an upper back emphasis and we're looking at hitting that rear delt, we're not just stopping when the elbow's in line with the scapula, we're looking at pulling that back as far as possible and really squeezing there. So generally, I'd like a rear delt fly on a sort of rear delt fly machine, but I don't have one of these. So an upper back row works absolutely fine. And if anything, it's potentially better because that's an area which I need a little bit more volume anyway. So just looking at driving those elbows back, chest up tall, and really squeezing those shoulder blades back. You'll notice with this one, as you fatigue, it's very easy to start leaning back. So trying to keep that torso nice and still and driving those elbows back even more. That's potentially why I'd prefer a machine like a rear delt fly, because you can brace into it a little bit more. I technically could put a bench in here and brace into it, but the angle, obviously I don't have a commercial cable pulling machine, so I can't change the height of that cable, and it's just a little bit awkward when I'm driving down at that level. So making do with this. It would potentially make sense, yes, to have sort of a chest support, as fatigue at this point in the session is obviously pretty damn high. So having that chest support to brace into it when you have less ability to brace yourself does make sense. So last up, arms. So a dual pull down here. So I've only got one cable here, so you can see on the machine here that there's one cable, and then what I've done is I've put a clip, then 2 clips, and then off each clip is a daisy chain, and then off those daisy chains is a clip and then a cuff. So my hands are in there, and I'm looking at keeping this down. I'm not letting my shoulders hunch up. I'm pinning them down. My elbows, I'm looking at pulling behind my body a little bit. And the whole goal with this tricep dominant movement is to keep that elbow still. We're not letting that elbow move, but we're just looking at flexion and extension at that elbow. So flexion, extension at the elbow, and tensing and contracting that tricep. One thing I've really found beneficial in terms of sort of growing the arms is spending a little bit more time at each portion of the range. So at that stretch of the tricep, and then where the triceps lengthened, and that contraction when the triceps shortened. So spending a little bit of time at each range and just really contracting from there. So here I ran, so with the upper back row, I ran 2 sets, 12-15. Here I'm running, again, 2 sets, 12-15. And then just into a cable hammer curl to finish things up. Again, spending time at each portion of the range, not letting my shoulders hunch over and take the loading, just really looking at pulling with that bicep and into that sort of brachialis. So the goal here, keeping the elbow nice and still, coming down, pausing, and then driving up, not letting that elbow just move a ton. When I do sort of like a supinated curl and look at really getting into that bicep instead of sort of around that forearm thickness and sort of brachialis, I let my elbows come forwards and get a little bit of shoulder flexion to allow me to get that bicep fully short. But in this case, I'm keeping the elbow nice and still, keeping that neutral grip, and I'm driving up there. And again, spending time at each portion of the range, that stretch, that contraction, the shortened, the lengthened. So in this case, the lengthened would be down at the bottom. In that stretch, the shortened would be that contraction up top, spending time at each portion of that range, really contracting and not just throwing the weight. So I'm really focusing on moving that weight with that target muscle.